The 7th of January 1944. Over Bougainville. Dawn had not yet broken, but the sky carried a faint metallic sheen, cold, brittle, and colorless. In that dim half-light, two P-38 Lightnings carved through the upper air like silent steel arrows, their twin booms glinting with the first hints of sunrise reflected off the Pacific. Everything else was shadow. The jungle below was only a black mass, unbroken and unknowable. Inside the lead Lightning's cockpit, frost clung to the canopy edges. The pilot's breath ghosted into the tight space before being sucked away by the slipstream. His gloved hands rested on the throttles, steady but tense, guiding the aircraft eastward across hostile airspace where the silence felt unnatural, too still, too empty, the way the ocean sometimes goes quiet before a storm. A distant vibration trembled through the wings, low and rhythmic. The engines weren't struggling. That sound came from the air itself, a warning whisper at high altitude. The pilot listened to it like a veteran listens to wind shifts, reading danger in subtle tension. Below the peaceful calm, the Solomon Islands were a battlefield of hidden ambushes, burned wrecks, and drifting smoke that never fully cleared. The mission was simple on paper, a long-range sweep to break up Japanese reconnaissance flights. But in this war, no sweep was simple. The Japanese often sent pairs of Zeros before sunrise to probe Allied positions, and those Zeros were quick, agile, and flown by men who trusted their reflexes more than any machine. They believed the Lightning was too large, too heavy, too slow to climb with them. They had no idea what waited for them in the cold upper air. A flicker of movement registered as a faint glint far off the right wing, barely perceptible, like a star winking through cloud. The pilot didn't react outwardly, but something inside him tightened. His eyes narrowed. A second glint appeared, then a third. Not stars. Not reflections. Aircraft. 3 of them. High. Coming in obliquely from the sun's first glow. He exhaled once, steady and controlled, and nudged his wingman with a brief, sharp radio call, nothing more than a few clipped syllables. In the re-cockpit of the second Lightning, the wingman shifted, lowering his nose a fraction, letting the formation loosen just enough for maneuver space. Both aircraft maintained altitude, engines humming in patient restraint. They didn't brake. They didn't climb. They watched. Far above, the 3 Zeros descended like sharks sensing prey. Their silhouettes were unmistakable, long-nosed, slender, deadly. They flew with the confidence of men who expected the kill before the Americans even saw them. They believed their turn rate alone could dominate any encounter. They believed the Lightning size made it slow to react. They believed altitude was enough. What they didn't believe, what they couldn't imagine, was that the Lightnings had already seen them minutes earlier. The Pacific quiet snapped as the Zeros increased throttle, diving fast, sunlight flashing off their wings as they tightened formation. The whine of their engines grew, a rising metallic scream funneled through cold dawn air. The P-38s waited, motionless in their descent path, letting the trap tighten, letting seconds compress like a heartbeat preparing to spike. The lead Zero wavered slightly, adjusting trajectory. Its pilot finally noticed something off, something about the Lightning's posture, too stable, too centered, too aware. It was a tiny hesitation, but in air combat, hesitation becomes death. The P-38 leader slammed the throttles forward. Engines roared like caged thunder. The Lightning surged upward in an explosive climb, cutting a silver arc through the sky. The Zeros overshot by instinct, forced past their intended vector by the sudden disruption. Their formation fractured. For a fraction of a second, all 3 Japanese pilots were blind, shadows above them, the sun behind them, and 2 Lightnings suddenly no longer where they were supposed to be. The wingman's Lightning rolled hard left, slicing under the Zero formation in a narrow, controlled dive. The howl of wind tore across the canopy as he aligned his nose upward toward the trailing aircraft. The Lightning's heavy frame groaned under the G-load, metal trembling as the twin Allison engines clawed for acceleration in the thin air. The lead P-38 inverted at the top of the climb, executing a knee-perfect high yo-yo maneuver. Gravity pulled it downward like a falling blade. The pilot rode the plunge, letting altitude convert into speed, raw, aggressive speed that slammed into his chest and rattled every rivet of the cockpit. The Zeros tried to turn. They always tried to turn. It was their instinct, their doctrine, their lifeline. But at this altitude, in this cold, with this energy mismatch, turn rate meant nothing. Maneuverability meant nothing. Momentum ruled everything. The first Zero crossed the lightning sights. A short burst, no more than a heartbeat of fire. The .50 cals spat bright flashes that struck the cockpit in violent pulses. Traces carved a single straight line, unwavering and merciless. They struck the Zero's wing root. Shards of metal peeled away like burning leaves. The aircraft rolled violently, trailing smoke as the pilot fought to regain control that was already gone. It spiraled downward, disappearing into the clouds below. 1. The wingman's lightning pulled out of his underside climb, nose aligned perfectly behind the second Zero. That pilot saw him too late. He broke left, but the lightning stayed glued to his tail, engines screaming in a perfect pursuit arc. The wing guns opened, another brief eruption of light. The Zero burst into flame mid-turn, its silhouette vanishing in a flash swallowed by drifting vapor. 2. The third Zero dove, desperate to escape. The lead lightning followed. The chase had begun. The last Zero plunged into the lower atmosphere, its descent sharp and panicked, the pilot forcing the aircraft into a steep, high-risk dive that pushed the engine to a tortured howl. The canopy vibrated under pressure, the fuselage shuddering as air density increased. Below, the Pacific glimmered with cold dawn light, vast and indifferent. To the Japanese pilot, the only survival lay in getting low enough to turn inside the heavier American fighter, low enough that the lightning would overshoot, lose energy, or break off. It was reflex, doctrine, instinct. It had worked against dozens of Allied aircraft across the Pacific. But this morning, it was failing. The P-38 leader followed the dive with predatory patience. He didn't force the nose down immediately. He rode the upper envelope of the maneuver, letting gravity pull him into the chase without overcommitting, keeping his airspeed clean, controlled, building pressure without bleeding energy. Cold wind slammed against the canopy in a rising scream, the slipstream vibrating through his gloves and shoulders. The entire aircraft felt alive, tense, almost vibrating with the sense that the kill was already forming ahead. Cloud layers rose fast as the dive steepened. Moisture streaked across the canopy, beads of condensation smearing into thin silver lines. The lightning cut through a thin sheet of vapor like a blade through smoke. The pilot emerged from the cloud form with the Zero still ahead, closer now, the range shrinking with every second. Below them, Bougainville's coastline spread like a dark, uneven scar, twisted jungle canopies, muddy rivers threading through heavy green, and the first flickers of morning sunlight catching on drifting campfire smoke from hidden encampments. The world below was waking. Up here, nothing woke, only hunted or was hunted. The Zero pilot yanked into a shallow right turn at low altitude, forcing the airframe to its limits, banking hard enough that the wingtips nearly skimmed the tree line. His heartbeat thrashed against his ribs. He knew the lightning should not be able to match this at such low level. He knew this turn should buy him seconds to escape, seconds to level out and sprint toward the nearest base, seconds to vanish into the jungle haze. But when he rolled out of the turn, the P-38 was still there. The lightning's wings leveled behind him, steady, implacable. No wasted motion. No widening arc. Just perfect pursuit geometry closing meter by meter. Far above, the second lightning circled back upward, scanning the sky in wide arcs as he regained altitude. The pilot's breathing slowed. Sweat from the high-G maneuvers chilled instantly in the cold air, leaving his flight suit damp and cold. He searched for any sign of additional Japanese fighters, scatter groups, escorts, or a larger reconnaissance element they might have missed in the first engagement. The Solomon Islands had become notorious for hidden formations, deception flights, and Japanese pilots who used cloud shadows as weapons. Nothing. Only the distant rumble of surf and the soft hiss of wind over metal. He keyed the MIC for a short radio burst, 2 clipped words. A warning. A reminder. Stay sharp. The kill wasn't the mission. Survival was. Back at sea level, the chase knifed through humid air so thick it felt like water. The Zero pilot attempted one final evasive maneuver, pulling suddenly upward in a vertical climb, hoping the lightning would stall out if he followed too sharply. The Zero was lighter, more responsive at low altitude. This was supposed to be its domain, its sanctuary. He pulled hard. The nose pitched upward. The engine roared. For a moment, the aircraft clawed skyward with raw desperation. But the P-38's twin Allisons answered with a deeper, heavier growl. The American fighter surged upward behind the climb, its mass working in its favor, converting speed into a steep pursuit angle with brutal efficiency. It didn't need to outturn the Zero. It simply needed to track it long enough to finish the job. The Japanese pilot felt the mistake instantly. His vertical climb stalled too early. The aircraft hung for a heartbeat, floating, weightless, vulnerable. The lightning rose beneath him. Wind buffeted the P-38's canopy, rattling metal seams, making the controls heavy in the pilot's hands. But he held the nose steady. Airspeed bled. Distance closed. The Zero's belly filled the gun sight. One burst. A flash of light erupted from the lightning's wing roots. The .50 caliber fire hammered upward in a tight cluster, sparks ripping across the Zero's underside. The Japanese aircraft jolted violently as the rounds tore through the engine compartment. Smoke erupted instantly, trailing backward in thick, expanding clouds. The Zero tipped forward, nose dropping. A thin plume of fire extended from the cowling. The pilot fought the controls, trying to stabilize, trying to level out long enough to bail or glide. But the aircraft was falling too fast. The flames grew, carried by the slipstream, licking back toward the cockpit. It struck the jungle canopy in a muted explosion of orange light and scattering debris. The fireball illuminated the trees for a single brief moment before smoke swallowed the impact site entirely. 3. The lightning leader pulled back into level flight, breathing hard, sweat streaking down his temples despite the cold. His hands steadied on the controls. No celebration. No relief. Only the familiar tension that followed every engagement, an awareness that for every trio of aircraft shot down, another could be forming just beyond the horizon. The wingmen returned to visual range, descending out of the pale clouds above. Their formation rejoined with silent precision, two sharp silhouettes cutting through the brightening morning sky. But neither pilot relaxed. The mission was not over. The Pacific had a way of punishing those who let their guard slip, even for a moment. A faint echo crackled through the headsets, something distant, thin, almost drowned in static. Another contact. Somewhere, beyond the eastern haze, engines were rising. Something else was coming. And the lightnings were already committed deep into enemy airspace. The radio static thickened, expanding from a faint whisper into a tremor of distorted engine noise. The pilots exchanged no words, they didn't need to. Both men felt the subtle shift in the air, the deepening tension, the cold tightening in the stomach that signaled unseen movement beyond the visible horizon. Dawn was now a pale gold line stretching over Bougainville, but instead of bringing comfort, it only revealed more sky in which threats could hide. The lightnings climbed gently, not enough to bleed speed, but enough to maximize visibility. Their propellers carved rhythmic pulses through the humid air, leaving faint spirals of disturbed mist in their wake. Every few seconds, each pilot scanned high and low, reading light streaks on the ocean surface, the shape of cloud shadows, and the faint shimmer of movement far to the east. Then they saw them. 6 silhouettes emerging from the morning glare, spread wide, descending slowly, confident in their numbers. More Zeros. Fresh, disciplined, approaching with deliberate control. They weren't diving recklessly. They were forming a trap. The leader felt it instantly. The Japanese weren't coming in fast. They were pushing them downward, trying to herd the lightnings into lower altitude where turn radius mattered, where jungle glare and uneven air currents favored lighter aircraft. It was a textbook tactic, a tightening snare. The P-38s held altitude for the moment, refusing the bait. Their engines growled at a stable pitch, vibrating through the airframe. The wingman squeezed his gloved hands once, adjusting his posture, preparing for the hit that would come hard and sudden. The 6 Zeros spread, forming a wide U-shape. Descending in a synchronized arc, metallic glints flashed through their formation like signal lights, each pilot adjusting angle and speed by fractions. They moved as if sharing the same heartbeat. The lightning leader pushed his throttles forward. Not a full climb. Not a retreat. A shallow advance, stepping into the danger instead of yielding to it. Below him, the jungle canopy shimmered under the rising sun, a restless ocean of green that had wrecks, foxholes, and decades of death. The Zeros accelerated. Wind pressure thickened, compressing the air around the P-38 canopies. The soundscape changed, high-pitched engine screams blending into a single rising tone, like a metal blade pulling across steel. The Japanese formation tightened, funneling toward the Americans, closing from multiple angles. The lightning split. Not wide, only enough to force the Japanese formation to break symmetry. The leader veered left, wingman right, both maintaining climbing momentum. Instantly, the 6 Zeros reacted, 3 chasing each lightning. It fractured the ambush, turning a surgical encirclement into 2 simultaneous engagements. The leader's lightning banked sharply into the rising sun. Light flooded his canopy, bleaching everything into white shapes and silhouettes. It was a calculated risk. The glare would blind him, but it would blind the Zeros worse. The harsh Pacific sun struck their unshaded lenses, turning their forward view into blinding burn. 1 Zero overshot immediately, losing spatial awareness for a split second. The lightning snapped downward in a high-speed drop that made the airframe groan under pressure. G-forces crushed into the pilot's chest, vibrating his bones. The world funneled into a trembling tunnel of colorless streaks. The Zero reappeared below. The lightning's nose dipped just a degree. A short burst flashed. Impact. Metal shards spiraled away as the Zero rolled uncontrollably, trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. It didn't explode. It simply fell, like a marionette with cut strings, vanishing into the jungle below. But the other 2 were still closing. The second Zero slashed in from the right, cannon flashes erupting from its nose. Traces whipped past the lightning's canopy, streaking gold lines against blue sky. The American pilot instinctively rolled. The heavy twin-boom airframe, responding slower than the Japanese fighter, but with greater authority. The sudden barrel roll forced the Zero to adjust position, missing the perfect firing angle by inches. The third Zero dove from above. This one was patient, no wild shots, no wasted angle. He wasn't chasing. He was stalking. The lightning leader felt his stomach tighten. This Zero pilot was different. His movements were minimal, disciplined, each adjustment made at the edge of aerodynamics rather than instinct. He was waiting for the lightning to commit to a sustained turn, to bleed speed, to reveal a predictable vector. Below, the wingman faced his own tightening crisis. 3 Zeros rode his tail in a staggered pursuit pattern, 1 close, 2 in reserve. Their formation was cruelly efficient. The closest Zero fired short, deliberate bursts that snapped past the P-38's tail, gnawing at distance inch by inch. The wingman dropped low, skimming the upper reach of the tree canopy. Leaves and drifting moisture streaked across his canopy, blurring his view. The leading Zero dove tighter. The lightning pulled sharply upward. The Zero followed. At the apex of the climb, the P-38 stalled for a split moment, but intentionally. The nose dipped. Gravity seized it. In that same instant, the Zero overshot, forced ahead by momentum. The wingman squeezed the trigger. The .50 cals roared, ripping through the Zero's fuselage. The aircraft erupted in black debris, fire trailing behind it as it plunged into the trees. The 2 reserve Zeros recoiled, shocked by the sudden loss. Their formation loosened, hesitation breaking the rhythm of the pursuit. But back in the high sky, the leader was trapped between 2 remaining attackers. The disciplined Zero struck first. He dove in from the upper rear quarter, lining the lightning in a slow, predatory arc. His engine whined smooth, controlled, the aircraft maintaining perfect angle. The other Zero pressed from the opposite side, firing in pulses that bracketed the lightning in deadly converging lines of fire. The American pilot banked sharply, forcing his aircraft into an aggressive energy bleed that only a twin-engine fighter could sustain. The lightning decelerated unnaturally fast. The disciplined Zero overshot by only a fraction, but it was enough. He corrected instantly, too instantly. His second adjustment put him directly in the American's tracking arc. The lightning's guns barked once. The disciplined Zero shuddered violently, black smoke erupting from the wing root. The aircraft rolled, flaming debris trailing behind as it spiraled out of sight. But the final Zero was already diving for revenge. He struck from below, climbing straight into the lightning's underside. A deadly angle. A fatal geometry. The P-38 pilot saw him too late. The lightning leader reacted on instinct alone, yanking the control yoke back with a force that sent a tremor through the entire airframe. The nose pitched upward sharply, but the Zero below was already committed to its attack run. Its engine shrieked in a rising crescendo, coming up fast, too fast for a clean escape. The Japanese pilot had chosen the most dangerous vector possible. A high-angle climbing strike directly into the Lightning's blind underside, where the American fighter's guns couldn't reach. The pilot felt the world tighten around him. Sound dimmed. Motion slowed. All that remained was the silhouette rising beneath him, a pale shape climbing like a spearhead toward his belly. The Lightning was heavy, built for endurance and firepower, not acrobatics. Avoidance at this angle was nearly impossible. He rolled the aircraft anyway. The twin-boom fighter lurched sideways, skidding through the air in a violent slip that rattled the canopy and groaned through the wings. The Zero's burst ripped through the space he'd occupied a second earlier. Traces snapped upward, slicing past the tail, leaving bright orange streaks cutting across vision like molten wire. The Zero didn't miss by luck. The Lightning's evasive dive came from deep experience, a reflex honed by dozens of narrow escapes, by the knowledge that instinct was sometimes the only defense at close range. The Japanese pilot corrected instantly and pulled into a sweeping climb, positioning himself for another pass. He didn't break off. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He flew with the quiet, lethal discipline of someone who had survived many battles in the Solomon skies. The Lightning leader leveled, then climbed sharply, trying to reset altitude advantage before the Zero completed its turn. The engines roared, the twin Allisons straining as he forced every ounce of power from them. The air thinned, the canopy thrust returning at the edges, the sky growing colder as he pushed toward higher ground. But the Zero climbed faster. A lightweight frame. A perfectly timed angle. A pilot who knew precisely how to exploit energy differentials. The American was running out of sky. Below, the wingman emerged from the lower canopy, breathing hard, flight suit damp with sweat. He saw the unfolding duel far above, two aircraft circling higher and higher, locked in a narrowing spiral. He pushed his throttles forward, climbing to support, but the distance was too great. Altitude takes time, and time was running thin. Up above, the Japanese pilot crested into the Lightning's blind spot a second time. He rolled smoothly into position behind the P-38, lining up the shot with steady hands. His aircraft vibrated as he squeezed the trigger. A burst of fire streaked forward, snapping into the space just behind the Lightning's right boom. Rounds punched through empty air, close, controlled, deliberate. He was marking the trajectory. The next pass would be fatal. The Lightning leader understood. He felt the enemy closing in the way a hunted animal senses a predator's breath, silent but heavy, almost physical. His engine gauges trembled under stress. Fuel sloshed unevenly. His airspeed dipped dangerously low for high-altitude combat. A single mistake would end it. He forced the climb another 100 feet. Then he cut power for a fraction of a second. The sudden deceleration jerked him forward against the straps. The Lightning dropped like a dead engine, losing lift in an instant. Airflow snapped past the canopy in a shrieking rush. The Zero behind overshot again, but this time violently, the momentum hurling it forward in a steep, uncontrolled surge. It was a brutal maneuver. Risky. Desperate. It worked. The Zero streaked past the Lightning's nose, its silhouette filling the gun sight for the briefest flicker of time, a shape suspended in perfect alignment. The Lightning's guns roared. The boast struck the Zero's engine cowling in a concentrated blast. Fire erupted instantly, swallowing the nose in a violent bloom. The Japanese pilot fought the stick, forced the aircraft into a shallow roll, trying to break the descent, trying to buy seconds of control. But the flames spread too fast. The aircraft fell in a spiraling arc of smoke and burning fragments, plunging toward the jungle shadows far below. Silence reclaimed the sky. Not peace. Never peace. But silence, the kind that comes after sudden violence, when the engines drone steadily and reality takes a few seconds to catch up. The Lightning leader steadied his breathing, his hands trembling despite the cold. His aircraft vibrated from the strain of the last maneuvers. Control surfaces responded sluggishly, but reliably. He checked the gauges. Damage, but nothing catastrophic. He dropped altitude until he located his wingman climbing toward him, the other Lightning emerging from a streak of sunlight like a dark apparition. Their formation rejoined in silence, 2 scarred survivors gliding over a patchwork of jungle, smoke, and coastline. 3 Zeros already destroyed. 3 more neutralized. 1 final duel survived. But no pilot in the Pacific measured victory by numbers. They measured it by who returned. The air over Bougainville felt heavier as they headed west toward Allied lines, the morning sun rising over their shoulders. The jungle canopy shimmered below, indifferent to the machines that had fought above it. Smoke curled upward from a distant ridge, whether from battle or campfires, no one could tell. War blurred every boundary. Their radios crackled with faint Allied signals as they approached friendly airspace. The engines eased. Tension subsided by degrees, not all at once. Sweat dried. Hands steadied. Breath returned to normal rhythm. They had survived a morning ambush deep in enemy territory. They had escaped coordinated traps. They had engaged and outmaneuvered some of the sharpest Zero pilots remaining in the region. Landing gear extended. The runway came into view, a thin strip carved into the jungle, framed by smoke pots and scattered wrecks from earlier months. Ground crews waited near the edge, watching the approach of the 2 returning fighters. Touchdown came with a heavy rumble, tires biting into the rough surface. Dust billowed behind the lightnings as they rolled to a stop. When the pilots climbed out, the morning sun finally broke fully across the field, revealing the streaks of oil, smoke, and stress etched into every panel of their aircraft. Word spread fast. 3 Zeros destroyed before the enemy could react. 3 more outmaneuvered in the climb. 1 final duel in the high sky that ended in fire. In the weeks that followed, Japanese pilots would discuss the encounter in scattered outposts, puzzled by how the heavy twin-boom fighters had reacted so fast, climbed so aggressively, and fired with such disciplined bursts. They wrote of moments where the Americans seemed to appear from nowhere, using altitude and energy with unnerving precision. They were baffled not by the machines alone, but by how the pilots wielded them. And above the Pacific, the air remained quiet again. A silence carved by the long shadows of 2 lightnings returning home. A silence that carried the weight of everything that had happened in those few brutal minutes at dawn. A silence the war would not forget,